is obviously part of Edible Open Gardens, and I went around them last year. Thought, well, I could have a go at that and make me actually do stuff too. You know, give me some purpose for getting on with things that I wanted to do for ages. And I do try and grow quite a lot of food in the garden. Use every little bit of space that I can, but I'm increasingly starting to do it in a more kind of permaculture, following permaculture principles. So hence doing a little workshop today about permaculture. I did a design course last year, beginning of last year, and after doing that kind of equipped me with some of the skills, I suppose, for doing a bit of a design. It's about taking kind of natural systems as the basis as the model for designing kind of human habitats, really. And the idea behind that is that, you know, evolution over billions of years has come up with some pretty good designs and pretty good ways of doing things, and if we try and mimic those a bit, it can actually make life quite a lot easier for us and be more efficient in terms of energy use and that. But basically, permaculture, there's kind of three main ingredients to permaculture. One is that there's a set of ethics, which are kind of earth care, so about looking after the planet. People care about people are really important components of the planet. We're not just kind of separate to the natural world, you know, we're part of it. And then fair shares, which is about kind of equitable distribution of resources and that kind of thing. So those principles kind of underpin permaculture. And then there's a set of ecological principles, which are more about the kind of processes that happen in the natural world and how we can try and use those to guide what we do. And then on top of that, you've got a set of design tools which enable you to kind of transform that information into something practical. So it's a very practical thing, permaculture. But yeah, the thing about zones is that when you do a design, it's one of the things you think about is where you are and where your house is, or your centre, if you like, and how different bits of your kind of your permaculture world, if you like, you need different things at different proximities. So a classic thing is you try and grow herbs close to your kitchen door because you need to pop out and get them. You know, that's the best way of using herbs. You don't want your herbs to be at your allotment 3 miles away. You know, you have to go there and get a sprig of parsley. And then further away, you might have your kind of productive area, not too far, so you need to be able to go there quite regularly, but you don't have to be, it doesn't have to be right on your doorstep. And then all the way to the kind of wilderness zone, really, which is kind of zone, is numbered as zone 5, I think. It's wilderness, where that's where the kind of biodiversity is, and you need that because it supports everything else that's going on. And that you can do that zoning at a whole range of different scales. So in my garden, you could say that, you know, I try and grow herbs up on the deck up there, and things like blueberries in the tubs where you can just go and get a few for your breakfast, and then there's some beds here which are growing kind of vegetables and things, and then down at the end is the pond and the kind of wildlifey bit. Yeah, the kind of ecological principles that there are, there's I think about a dozen of them, which I've got here on a bit of paper. So they're things like these are the principles of naturally kind of sustainable systems that you might want to think about how you can construct your own living space to try and mimic some of these systems. So for instance, the importance of edge in kind of natural systems, you get most productivity in kind of edges between different types of habitat. So a woodland edge is much more productive, much more diverse than the middle of a woodland or the middle of a field, because it's where two kind of areas meet, and so the conditions are kind of quite good for a lot of things, so a lot of stuff will come up. So maximising the use of the edge is a good thing to do. Cycling and nutrient cycling is another thing, or cycling of anything really. So in natural systems, obviously there's lots of productivity, and then that plant matter or animals will eventually die, and kind of the nutrients go back into the soil, so there's this continuous cycling. And so in permaculture, you know, composting is a really big thing, because you're taking, you know, you might grow stuff and the waste will go on the compost heap, and then you can use that to fertilise the ground next year, so you're in this kind of cyclical thing. Multiple function is another sort of ecological principle. In kind of natural ecosystems, very few things have just one function, and trying to mimic that in a garden is here. What I tried to do is everything really that I've planted, certainly recently, has at least two functions. And one of those functions can be it looks nice and it makes you feel nice to look at it. That's fine. It doesn't have to be a completely, a crop kind of thing. But as well as looking nice, I want it to do something for the rest of the garden, I suppose. It might be a really good bee plant. Perhaps it flowers early in the year, so it gives something for bees to have quite early in the year, which means then you're more likely to have bees in your garden, which will then pollinate all fruit and etc. etc. You could have plants which look nice, like the marigolds up there. They look nice and you can eat them, and they look lovely in a salad, having some marigold flowers. Things that climb up to kind of make use of the vertical space, so they look nice because they're going up, and also they're providing a crop with the beans and hops up there. So that kind of multi-functionality is quite a good thing to try and do in permaculture. There's a whole load of others, but I won't have time to go into those in detail. Another principle in permaculture is being aware of feedback. So if something doesn't work, you think about why it doesn't work and try and adapt what you do, rather than just trying to do the same thing over and over again and failing miserably. And I've always grown tomatoes in this greenhouse, and they've done okay, but sometimes the crop's been quite poor, and I have a real problem with watering enough. I'm just not very good at watering, and so you'd get tomatoes and they'd split because you've watered them too much. And you get that when we get ripe tomatoes, you think, oh lovely, I'm going to have a crop in a couple of days, so you water them furiously and then they split. So I've kind of adapted the system that I use, and now it's a form of, it's called ring culture, where you grow, they're in a pot with no bottom, so that they're kind of they're deeper effectively in the soil than they would be otherwise, because the pot kind of holds the soil further up the side. And then I've cut off water bottles, plastic bottles, sunk into the ground, so that when you water them, the water actually goes right to the roots. Because another thing that can happen with tomatoes is that if you water the surface, it tends to encourage these roots right at the top, and they're not actually very good for gathering nutrients which are deeper in the soil. So that gets the water right to the roots. And as a result, last year the crop was much better, bigger tomatoes which didn't split as much, so I'm trying it again this year. With the chilies here, I've grown chilies most years, and they normally do pretty well, I found, and I've grown them as an annual, like most people probably do. We kind of think it's an annual crop, chilies. Actually they're perennial, they'll carry on for years if you can keep them over winter. So I've got some which are planted this year, and then there's this one here. I've just, as a kind of experiment really, I've actually tried to keep two, and this one keeps on being eaten by slugs. But this is last year's chili, so I'm seeing whether it actually gives me a crop this year. And it means, if it does, then it means in future years I don't have to sow and raise a whole load of new chili plants. I'll just kind of reuse the ones that I had in previous years. So again, that's mimicking a natural thing, because naturally they would actually just survive over winter and carry on growing. So yeah, the chickens will eat kind of scraps of vegetables. Obviously we haven't done it for a while, but we normally put a kind of mulch in here of kind of wood chippings or whatever we can get hold of, really, without having to buy stuff from the garden centre. And the chickens sort of run around there, and they poo all over it, and they also pooing in their house there, which we clean out kind of once a week. That all goes onto the compost bin in the corner there. The stuff outside actually just composts naturally, so after a couple of months or so, whatever you've laid down there will be quite nice, and you can just rake it all up and bag it up, take it to the allotment, or use it on the garden to grow vegetables, which you then bring home and eat some of and put some back into the chickens. So it's this kind of continuous cycling thing. And the idea in permaculture is to try and minimise the amount that you have to bring into the system. You're trying to keep it within the system, because it's more efficient to do that. So always observe, and that's really, before you do anything, you need to look at where you are and what you've got. Think about the environmental conditions. So it took me quite a while to actually realise I thought my garden faced west because the sunset's over there, and actually by looking a bit more carefully about where the sun goes and actually getting my compass out and taking a measurement, that's actually pointing slightly north of west. And I always assumed the front garden was really shady, because by the time we kind of noticed the sun being up, it's probably at the end of the day when we're out on the deck trying to have tea and the sun's really strong on it, and so you think that's the hot bit of the garden. Actually the front garden is sunnier, because south is kind of over there rather than there. So the sun, once the sun's up past the hill, past the common, our front garden gets quite a lot of sun for quite a lot of the day. In the winter it hardly gets any sun because the sun's so low it barely clips the hill before it's sort of behind the houses again. With that in mind, you know, it's made me think a little bit more about where I put plants in the front. If you looked in the front garden, but I planted a vine in there this year because I would have otherwise probably planted it here, but actually it's probably a bit too north here for a vine, whereas the back garden effectively is more or less southeast. So then the B bit is boundary, rather, so thinking about the boundary to wherever you're doing your design. So, you know, once you kind of know a bit about your location, you need to sort of kind of look into what might grow well in different conditions, what will work, and then evaluate is kind of, you know, taking all that information and then kind of deciding what you're going to do, and then you do your design, which is the D bit, and then there's the I that is implementation, so it's actually doing the design. Big thing, permaculture is actually going and doing stuff, not just kind of reading about it. And then the M bit is the monitoring, and that's where the feedback thing comes in. So you do stuff and you kind of check and see how it's worked, or what has worked and what hasn't, and then adapt. So it's a continuous cycle. Right, so yeah, for this garden I've done a little base map now, and what you would normally do if you were doing a kind of proper permaculture design is you do a base map of your plot, and you do that. In permaculture you're encouraged to do that fairly low tech, so you walk the land, you pace measurements out rather than going off a Google image or something, which you could do, and you go and measure stuff, and then you work out where north is, and you draw a kind of base map of your site, and then you can kind of start plotting things in where you might want to do things, and it helps you kind of think about the whole garden and what goes where. If you walk the boundary of your plot, whether it's a small garden or a field, it actually makes you look at things, you know. And we kind of did it originally with a view to it being a lovely space for the children to play in. Don't, of course, like, you know, often the way, isn't it? What you think your children are going to like doesn't turn out to be quite right, but I quite like sitting in there. It's very secluded and peaceful, and you can just watch the chickens and stuff. So, well, again, we've got some pellets now, but yes. we started off, we kind of read about it. Most of if you look at stuff about chickens, the absolute conventional thing, 95% of things will tell you have to feed them layers pellets, yes. Which is probably true if you want guaranteed eggs every day. Yes. But the layers pellets are, you can get organic ones and everything, but they're soya, yes. And I think you can get ones that are definitely not GM soya, but you know, they still come from the Americas or whatever. So we kind of thought, well, do we really have to use something that's, again, permaculture principle, and say bringing in something from quite a long way away into the system, you really have to. And people didn't used to use that, people used to just give them kitchen scraps